Whoa, okay, so here we are. Enies Lobby. I think that Enies Lobby perfectly symbolizes the power that long-form narratives have when it comes to delivering satisfying emotional payoffs, and makes the case, more than any other anime storyline I've ever seen, for the importance of patience. I'm no heartless, hollow robot. I'm a man, damn it, and this storyline got to me. It cut through to my soul, and I'm very excited to share my first impressions on the Enies Lobby arc today. For those of you who are just joining us on this little watch-along first impression series, hey, I'm Denny, and I'm going through One Piece for the first time, offering my thoughts on each storyline. Last month, I covered the first half of the Water 7 saga, discussing Long Ring, Long Land, and Water 7. So if you want to know my thoughts on this whole saga, I recommend checking that video out first and then coming back to this one, because this is essentially part 2. With introductions out of the way, let's boogie back on into this epic tale, picking up with the Straw Hats charging full steam ahead toward the nightless island of Enies Lobby. So if you're watching this video, I don't think I need to tell you that Enies Lobby is one hell of an arc to try and tackle. The sheer scale of the arc and the number of characters and minor plotlines going on make talking about all the granular details nearly impossible in a video like this. I'm sure I'm gonna miss certain small beats people may love, or barely mention smaller characters that are fan favorites, and I apologize in advance for that. Maybe there are people out there who could absorb every bit of information in a story of this scale and break down every single aspect in a concise way, but I don't have that skill. So if I miss anything you want my opinion on, please feel free to leave a comment. I'm sure I have an opinion that just didn't make the cut for this video, and I'll try to respond to everyone I can. But just know, I don't think there is a single character or even the most minor plot detail in this arc that I hated. This may be the hardest I gush about this series in any of my videos, so brace yourself for some fanboy splooging. It's going to get everywhere. Let's begin with the Straw Hats and their new superhero companion, Soja King. I alluded to this in my last video, but I think it's so perfect how Usopp stays in his Soja King disguise for the majority of this arc, and we don't see his face for dozens and dozens of episodes until it's time for some emotional payoffs, which we'll get to much later. When he meets everyone on Rocket Man, and everyone, even people who only met Usopp for like 5 seconds, all recognize him, but Luffy and Chopper don't, and are instead blown away by a cool superhero, is perfect. It fits all the characters so well and allows this ridiculous gag to continue perpetually throughout this arc. Meanwhile, we, as the viewer, are getting introduced to the rest of CP9 and establishing the character of Spandam. I think the concept of the all-powerful world government is a really intimidating force for our band of pirates to have to deal with in any situation, let alone a full-blown invasion into one of their strongholds, so it was nice to see them fleshed out a bit. Also, the massive gates of justice provide an excellent symbol of power for the legitimate threat to our heroes in both the short and long term. So, the 3 other members of CP9 that we are introduced to kind of feel like bottom of the barrel picks if I'm being honest. Like, it's no surprise to me that Oda designed the core 4 characters and then introduced Fukuru, Kamadori, and Jabra later, because they are each a little blend of annoying, although I came around on most of them after a while. This is also when the show gets explicitly Dragon Ball Z with the introduction of vaguely important power levels for each member of CP9. I guess I'm kind of surprised the series made it this far without some kind of power scaling system, although in the end, it doesn't matter too much. It just really served to show that Lucci is the baddest of the bad boys and hyped up the inevitable battle between him and Luffy. Now, let's talk about the invasion itself. It might be predictable looking back at it, but in the moment, the sheer shock of Luffy just zipping into Enies Lobby by himself and everyone's stunned reactions after just going over the plan in detail is so funny, I'd really have it no other way. In general, I like the structure of this assault. I think it starts out giving every character something important to do. The grunts go in to help clear the way, and then the Straw Hats come flying in the middle of the chaos on Rocket Man. Spandam and Gamora, these 2 massive Yagura bulls maneuvering on land with tank treads, are awesome beasts to behold, and they add such a sense of scale to the battle. Soja King being separated from everyone else, but them not realizing it for at least an episode or so is perfectly timed and leads to another long-term payoff. Usopp connects with the two giants who are guarding the Enies Lobby gates and learns they used to be part of the crew of giants who he met at Little Garden. These giants are under the impression those giants are prisoners of the world government and are serving as guards to get them out early. When Usopp tells them the truth, they take up arms with him, which leads to a glorious shot of the hero Soja King riding on the soldier of giants under his command. This also further cements the generations of cruelty that the world government has performed. Also, while this is all going on, I love that Kokoro, Chimney, and Gonbi all just plead innocence, using the Navy's perception of them to their advantage and claiming they are just hapless victims of kidnapping. They're all so insane, and they're a great presence in this arc. Before I go any further, I want to stop and focus on Spandam a bit. Although Lucci is the physical threat of this saga, I think it's safe to say that Spandam is the big bad. He was behind the scenes throughout all of Water 7, and he's the obvious face of the world government at Enies Lobby. Not only that, but he also has a direct tie into the origin story for two of the protagonists who are getting the most character development in this arc. Spandam is the motherfucking baddest of all bad boys so far, and I think he is perfectly sinister. His design is insanely creepy, and his office with the crisscrossing windows gives off this gothic villain vibe in his castle, which is contrasted by the permanent brightness of the island sky and his position on the side of justice. I love how his design and the specific setting he resides in help to visualize him as a walking contradiction. I think he is the best designed villain so far, maybe even the best designed character because of how well his physical appearance informs his character. And of course, his personality is dog shit. Like the worst person ever. He's always talking about what a hero he is when it's obvious he's a sociopath who is in charge of an army. The guy is fucking crazy, but he gets to hide behind the veneer of justice in order to justify his behavior. He can do anything that furthers his own goals because he is on the side of justice, and thus whatever he does is just and those he attacks are unjust. Spandam is also a representation of the world government. It's through him that we learn just how cruel the government can be. He is the embodiment of its twisted contradictions, but we see others acting in ways just like he does. People who are willing to serve dark justice. This is a term that comes up a lot around the character of Lucci, who isn't much different from Spandam, but we'll get to him later. I just really wanted to focus on those things because I think it sets the context for all the events of this arc and amplifies them. Our pirate heroes rescuing their friend from the horribly cruel justice of the government. Now, let's keep going. While everyone else is making their way to the drawbridge, Luffy begins his solo fight with the CP9 agent Blueno, and it's here we get the first transformation of the series, further solidifying its connection to established DBZ tropes. Second Gear is a really cool looking transformation. It isn't too bombastic, which I appreciate. Instead, it's subtle, with a slight red tint for Luffy as he emits steam, which adds to the atmosphere of the action. Overall, I thought this fight was a really cool display of Luffy's power-up. It makes sense that he'd have thought of a way to enhance his body after the recent beatings he's taken, and the action is impressive. I will say though that Blueno goes out like a massive idiot. How many times does he have to get hurt using Iron Body to get that it doesn't work that well against this squad? Even a non-powered up Sanji was able to do some damage while on the Puffing Tom. He stakes his whole life on sheer arrogance and dies like a fool, which I guess is fitting for a bull-headed man. Now I want to focus on the crux of the arc up to this point. The whole narrative turn of this arc hinges on how one conversation is going to go, the conversation between Luffy and Robin. I really appreciated that the story focused in on that relationship foremost. Luffy and the Straw Hats are there for one reason: Robin. No one is charging in, itching to battle their CP9 counterpart. Those fights don't get built up and promoted until after this conversation takes place. The most iconic visual of this whole arc comes after a glorious build-up to, complete with instant replays, the Straw Hats stepping up on the battlements across from the Tower of Law to show each of them fought their way here against all odds for Robin. I love that moment so much, but it's only the beginning. It's here that we finally get the long-teased, for nearly 200 episodes, fully flesh out backstory on Nico Robin, which is vital to this whole saga, and we learn exactly what happened at Ohara all those years ago. I can't do it justice, but the entire backstory builds and builds to all these heartbreaking revelations about Robin always feeling alone, always searching for a family, and then tragedy strikes and it's the worst thing imaginable. I'm sure I'm not the first person to make this point, but to me, the Buster Call is a direct allusion to nuclear weapons, and young Robin has to not only deal with the horrible reality of being the sole survivor of essentially a nuclear holocaust, but then living a life on the run as a wanted fugitive who couldn't trust anyone. We also learn the history between Aokiji and Robin and see the sliver of doubt he has in the Navy, and his commitment to justice had him break the rules and let Robin get away more than she even knows. Saul declaring to Robin that she'll make friends and that no one is meant to be alone makes me emotional just thinking about it, and of course, there is both Saul and her mother's final words telling her to live. Flashback to the present, and her fear isn't just that everyone will die in a Buster Call, but that the Straw Hats will go through all this to save her, only for them to later realize she's a burden and betray her. She's never been able to fully trust or rely on anyone since Ohara. That is when the Straw Hats declare war on the world government, showing their dedication to Robin no matter what, and Robin finally speaks her true wish, and we get this. I fucking cried after watching this the second time. The whole episode leading up to this explosion of emotion is probably the best in the series so far. It so completely fulfills satisfying answers to long-running questions in a way that is emotionally rich. That's not even mentioning all the really interesting stuff in her backstory, like the Lost Century, which is something I'm obsessed with learning more about. Robin isn't the only star of the show here though. Now it's Frankie's time to super shine. Frankie's backstory is so connected to Robin's that it makes sense he'd have a big character moment following the revelation about her past. After Robin's backstory and her declaration to the Straw Hats, Frankie makes a bet on the future of the world, burning the blueprints to the ancient weapon Tom passed down to him in Iceberg because of his belief in the Straw Hats. This moment felt like a real emotional and intelligent move for Frankie to make, and it progresses the stakes of the arc by making Spandam's whole plan now solely rely on getting Robin through the gates of justice. I feel that it's in this moment that Frankie joins the crew. He is aligned with them both emotionally and physically. I'd bet if you showed the episodes following this conversation to someone who'd never seen the show, they'd just think Frankie was part of the crew. I also appreciate how we fully get Frankie's backstory fleshed out and his full arc in regard to that backstory handled in this saga alongside Robin's. If they didn't wrap things up nicely in Enies Lobby and just teased it out for 200 episodes like they did with Robin, then the introduction of new crew members would begin to feel really formulaic. This kept it fresh while still providing an emotional and satisfying arc without stealing attention away from the other cast with how well tied in he was to the events of this saga. I think that all goes to show how important the inter-character relationships are to shaping the narrative of the show. The settings and action are really great, but it's grounded in the characters who you see grow throughout the story. Alright, I've gushed enough about this conversation set piece, but I felt like it was important to talk about because it was the narrative nexus of the whole Water 7 saga, maybe even more. All of Enies Lobby feels like what the story since entering the Grand Line has been building toward, and I think there are many fantastic payoffs, but this conversation sequence is probably the best of them. Also, Spandam is such a motherfucker in this whole scene, which is entertaining to watch, and all the core cast on both sides get acquainted with each other, which sets up the conflicts inside the Tower of Law. So the Straw Hats all ride a wild rocket man across the tower, driven by Kokoro, and we get a really sweet moment of her reflecting on Tom's past helping Gold Roger. Tom's workers are once again united in helping the future king of the pirates, and I just love this monstrous old woman and her cracked out sidekicks. This is no time for Looney Tunes though, this is the time for action, action, action! Like every saga since entering the Grand Line, we get the Straw Hats split off showdown. They all have to battle an agent of CP9 in order to gather the keys to Robin's handcuffs. Sounds simple enough, but buckle in because everyone gets their time to shine. This section bounces back and forth between a couple of characters with some overlapping action, so instead of playing a game of narrative ping pong, I'm going to tackle these fights by character. First up is Franky's fight with Fukaru. I thought this was a really fun battle which showed off how capable Franky was as a fighter and the importance of cola to his strength. Once he gets those sweet fizzies in his tum, the heavens applaud for him and he becomes super. I also thought the choreography of the fight itself used the setting of this fortress over an endless waterfall to its fullest, while also having fun with the newly introduced flight powers of CP9. This was just a really nice, concise showdown. Next up, Cha-Pa-Pa. Our sweet reindeer boy is running around, trying to alert the others about Zoro and Soja King's situation, and trying to grab the keys to free them. This puts him in conflict with Kamadori, and I don't know how I feel about this guy. He's very annoying, and I know he's supposed to be. His shtick worked for me about 50% of the time, but otherwise he felt like a walking padding machine the animators could squeeze extra seconds out of. His weird hair was okay, but the real impact of this fight comes from how totally wrecked Chopper gets. He's taken finger pistols and tempest kicks left and right, which forces him to resort to taking one more rumble ball than he should. Although this is now 2 sagas in a row where Chopper ends up pretty much immobilized after his fight until the end of the story, this is such a big moment that has ripple effects for the other characters. I thought it was a really unique moment that could only happen with his character, and it kept him relevant throughout all this chaos. The design of his transformation correctly feels like it came from a place of warranted desperation, which resulted in something horrifying. Mega Chopper gives me big Swamp Thing vibes, and I love it. Overall, a decent fight that left me more curious about the future. Now, okay. I've been dreading talking about this fight because I get why people would get enjoyment out of it, but I don't come to the show to watch lubed up ladies wrestle in bubbles. And that's not just a problem with this fight, but this arc in particular really had me feeling like Big Prude Polly, but I'm sorry, I have to say something. I really wish they'd tone down the fan service with showing off Nami's body, honestly. One of the reasons I was drawn to the show at the beginning was because unlike the typical shonen story, especially from the era when One Piece started, there were very few, if any, overt moments of objectifying its female characters. When it did happen, it felt like it was Nami getting one over on the boys, which I can respect and have fun with. I felt like this was a show I could present to anyone without fearing they'd think I was horny for cartoons. There's tons of shows like that, and more power to you if you're into that stuff, but I'm here for very different reasons, and this show seems to be growing more immature in that aspect, and I really have no respect for that at all. I mean, it even feels like Robin is going through some weird torture fetish stuff sometimes in this arc. I don't know, it was unsettling, and I'm pretty sure I saw an upskirt shot of Robin at one point. Like, can we please tone it down? Based on images I've seen of the future of the show, I know it's only gonna get worse, and I'm dreading every second of it. Alright, I'm stepping down from my soapbox now. Get it? Soapbox? Because of the soap lady with bubble boobies? The worst part of this fight is that it's a horribly boring battle. It's the weakest of the whole cruise, which sucks because I really liked Nami's battle in the Alabasta arc, and she's been sorely lacking in good fights since then. This fight kind of felt like a repeat of the Alabasta fight, but at first things seemed different when they paired her up with Kamadori. I was excited to see what that would be like, but then it became borderline hentai with her stripping down even more after being wrapped up in his hair tentacles, and I audibly groaned. So she then gets paired up with Khalifa, who is really not that exciting of a villain. I really liked her characterization before this fight, but it felt like the story just made her boring and dumb because it was more focused on sexualizing the situation for teenage boys than good action or character development. Nami's upgraded climb attack is cool, but I think her mirage powers really stretch believability. Also, her continued forecast-themed monologues simply suck. They go on for too long, aren't that clever, and are way too repetitive. And to top it all off, her victory is so anticlimactic. Khalifa literally sees the lightning coming and just doesn't dodge and then dies. So overall, this is the worst fight in this arc, easily. We learn nothing new about Nami as a character, and the action is subpar. Now let's get to the two-phase fights. Starting off with Sanji. Sanji is the first to fight Khalifa and loses off-screen to build the mystery of her devil fruit powers, but how Sanji behaves means that his thing with women finally came to a semblance of a crossroads. The time for it to be a kind of tired but still funny character flaw was over, and now it was either going to become too much and ruin the character, or inform the backstory of the character, who we suspiciously don't know too much about. I think it succeeds in being more interesting than annoying, but it was at this point where I was kinda yelling at the TV, although I think that was intentional. For that reason, I like this, but I'm still dying for some Sanji development. He's really the only character without any, and I don't want this to be a 5 sagas later thing either, which I'm fearing it to be. Meanwhile, Zoro and Soja King have gotten themselves into a ridiculous cartoon pickle. The pair of Straw Hats are up against Kaku and Jabra, who both transform into their monstrous devil fruit forms. I think it's so funny how fucking hard Kaku gets roasted over his giraffe powers. Everyone can't help but laugh at him, and it's so perfect, it keeps this life and death situation light and fun in a way this show handles really well. This helps to stretch things out because everyone else's fight in the section needs to end before this fight can really begin, so Zoro and Soja King are no longer handcuffed. So while Zoro and Soja King are handcuffed, this isn't so much a fight as it is a comedy bit. Zoro even uses Usopp as a sword for a while, which was a decent enough bit, but it doesn't really go anywhere. They're buying time, so let's get to what happens after they get those keys. Sanji has returned to his normal self following a quick bath and rescues the newly freed Soja King from Jabra's beating and gives Usopp some encouraging words. Then, the battle went on with Sanji showing off his fancy footwork, holding his own as Jabra tells him an immensely convoluted lie. I really like this trait with Jabra. I honestly wish he did it at least one more time because I think it's a fun way to show character through various reactions to his lies. That isn't the case, but Sanji gets this flaming hot foot, which is his new transformation power-up. Everyone's getting an upgrade this arc. Did you notice that? Second Gear, Super Climatact, Flaming Foot, Swamp Chomper, Kabuto, and there's still one form to go with Zoro. Not complaining, but this Flaming Foot was the most out of left field for me. It just seemed like we should have seen Sanji do this by this point by how easily he activates this significant power boost. Why didn't he try this at Baratier or Skypiea? He must have learned it from Zeph, or did he just learn it off screen with no mention or build-up? Maybe. It just felt a little off. I mean, Zoro's doesn't have much setup either, but he has a history of making up random bullshit to be used on the spot, so Sanji seems more plausible in reality, I guess, but I want some more info on how this came about, even though I feel like I won't get it. Either way, the action was extremely satisfying, and Sanji is as cool as ever. A pretty fun and quick fight, the setting was also nice. So, once Sanji takes Jabra away, we finally have the return to Kaku and Zoro's sword fight that kicked off at the beginning of this whole mess. Unfortunately, by this point, I felt like I had seen just about enough of Kaku and I was starting to get bored with him. I do think Zoro's demon illusion thing was a really creepy and unique look. The 3 heads and 6 arms is badass for a swordsman. However, I think this fight lasts about an episode too long, and I would have rather Zoro got his aura thing sooner, since it seemed to happen for really no particular reason anyway. The length of this fight made the simple payoff of the "you're fired" line feel too little, too late. I thought a lot of the aspects of this fight were fun, but I think it did suffer a bit because it had to act as the catalyst of the action for this section of the arc. It was overexposed, but still enjoyable, just not the best. Honestly, I think Frankie's fight may have been the most fun. There's one last matchup though, the new nexus of action for the remainder of this arc. Rob Lucci versus Straw Hat Luffy. We'll get back to this fight later, but I think Oda does a great job of characterizing Lucci in subtle ways throughout this arc since he arrived back at Enies Lobby, and I want to touch on them briefly. When the meeting of CP9 and Spandam ends, Lucci makes it clear that he doesn't care about Spandam's plot, that none of the CP9 agents cared about anything Spandam was up to. They're all just bloodthirsty maniacs who use justice as an excuse to kill. Throughout the build-up to his fight with Luffy, Lucci is shown manipulating events in his own cunning way so that he gets to fight Luffy. Lucci hears Luffy coming, but remains silent until Spandam asks him about it. Lucci didn't want Spandam to react until it was too late, so Lucci would have to fight. Lucci is hyper-intelligent and seems as though he's been in complete control of everything up to this point, and he's a fucking cat. Meanwhile, throughout this whole string of chaotic action, Spandam has been dragging Nico Robin closer to the gates of justice. Through his freakouts and violent outbursts at Robin, the story fleshes out the kind of man he is, and I love that he's such an outright villain. He really thinks he's this world hero, and he's actively trying to climb the Navy ladder, but he's a horrible piece of shit. The insane thing is that if he succeeds in his mission, he likely will have all the glory and success he dreams of. He's also so utterly incompetent that this moron ends up calling a buster call on himself on accident and then broadcasts his whole awful conversation with Robin to the entire island, exposing himself as a callous monster and warning everyone of their impending doom. This is a hilariously handled turning point in the story that ramps up the stakes of the action while giving Robin the chance to resist Spandam as much as she can now that his greatest threat to her has been executed. We also get the concrete confirmation that Spandam's father is the one who called in the original buster call on Ohara, so that further connects him to the inciting incidents for both Frankie and Robin's trajectory. This man is a creepy, spineless monster, and the build-up for his comeuppance was strong. So strong, in fact, that an unexpected shot to his face was extremely satisfying. Soja King takes aim at the world government thugs from the Tower of Law, and this was a great moment for the character. Like Sanji told him, Usopp uses his skill set to the fullest and does what only he can do. He pins the goons down while passing along the keys to Robin and the newly arrived Frankie. This felt like a nice little bow on Usopp's story of feeling inadequate, which is really what led to the group split in Water 7. Sanji recognized this and had to talk some sense into Usopp, telling him that not everyone can do everything, and Usopp needed to do what he does best. This clearly resonated with Usopp after taking another brutal beating from Jabra, so this vital role in the success of the crew's mission felt like a fitting conclusion to his development in this saga. Of course, Spandam's beating isn't over. He gets the absolute piss slapped out of his face by Robin's multiple arms, and it's a cathartic experience that I could watch for an entire episode. Everyone isn't in the clear just yet though. We still have the arrival of the Buster Call and Lucci to deal with. I think that Robin's traumatic trembling as the Buster Call begins is true to her character, and I'm glad they lingered on it. She only snaps out of it after Frankie fights off the Marines and begins to lead a charge to get the escort ship for the rest of the Straw Hats. Ensuring her friend's safety is what gets her going again. She declares she's not afraid anymore like she was on Ohara because now she has friends. And it isn't long after those friends arrive, completely zonked out of their minds at the reveal that Kokoro has been a mermaid this whole time. This is such a random and weird reveal, and I love it, particularly how this affects Sanji. No one saw this coming at all, and it's such a fun, wacky beat to add to this arc, which helps to keep things from feeling too heavy, even with imminent destruction surrounding them all. So the rest of this arc pretty much centers around the crew waiting for Luffy to finish his fight with Lucci so they can all leave together. Luffy finally activates third gear, and I don't know if I think it's as cool as second gear design-wise, like just parts of his body get bigger. I feel like we've seen that before, not on this scale, but it didn't really seem like a transformation like second gear did, more like a special attack with consequences. I really think the different elements of this battle, like the setting, atmosphere, and action, really add to build this awesomeness that unfolds on my screen. The Buster Call begins to rain down in Enies Lobby while Luffy and Lucci continue their battle, and it feels like this fight has taken a lot out of both of the characters. It feels more akin to the fight with Crocodile than with Eneru, but both of those battles were against elemental devil fruit users, whereas this fight is against a literal beast man, and you can really feel the damage they are doing to each other. It feels vicious. During this fight, we also get a little more backstory on Lucci, and I think the thematic conflict between Lucci versus Luffy, and more broadly, the world government versus the Straw Hats, comes into focus. In the flashback about Lucci, we are shown that he's a cold, cruel agent of justice. He executes 500 hostages of an allied kingdom for being weak, and then goes on to kill the pirates who had invaded the kingdom in the first place. He justified his actions to the hostages by telling them that justice would never surrender to evil. This backstory is presented to us through another Navy higher-up, and we are shown in the same episode that these world government thugs can be at least as cold as Lucci in their pursuit of dark justice. That's what this battle ultimately boils down to. Lucci even calls himself an agent of dark justice, which is an inherent oxymoron. If Lucci represents dark justice, that would mean Luffy represents light chaos, criminality, and then extend that out to the organizations each of them represent. This arc solidifies that the world government, in its pursuit of justice, has become a bastardized organization that not only allows cruelty to slip through, but fosters and encourages acts of horrific cruelty while hiding behind the mask of justice. Luffy is down. He's suffering from overexerting his body with third gear, and the fight has worn him out. It looks like Lucci may have won. That is when Soja King reveals he's been Usopp this whole time? What the fuck? Usopp shouting at Luffy and challenging Lucci himself in order to motivate Luffy to get back up and keep fighting was excellent. Usopp is being a loving dick to Luffy this whole time, and he's essentially betting that Luffy cares about him so much that he knowingly puts himself in a life or death situation so that Luffy either has to stand up to protect him or stay down and let him die. It's really powerful, and I'm super happy Usopp and Luffy had a moment like this to tie up this fantastic arc. It connected things very nicely with Water 7. From here, Luffy makes a promise he won't hit the ground until he beats Lucci, and surprise surprise, he doesn't, and it nearly makes me cry. Then he goes all out with a Gum Gum Jet Gatling, and what can I even say? Behold its fury. Now we get to the end of this chaos. Lucci is defeated, but all the Straw Hats are surrounded by dozens of battleships with no way to escape, and utter annihilation is about to rain down on them. When all hope seems lost, that's when a mysterious voice calls out to the Straw Hats to jump into the sea. Who is it? The goddamn Going Merry! I feel like I really enjoy the idea of this on paper, but something about the Merry's voice, both in the dub and sub, make the scene feel kinda very Teletubbies. And it's not just the Merry talking, but the Merry says the most kiddie thing the show has ever said in like a fairy voice, and it felt very on the nose and kind of off-putting, like kinda cringe. I think the moment would have been fine if the Merry didn't speak. If it was implied the Straw Hats heard a voice, but then at the last second, the audience doesn't also hear this twinkling fairy talking about heading out to the Sea of Adventure. I can see this working in manga form more so than anime. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but that felt odd. That specific line felt really odd. Also, I think removing the Merry's dialogue here would make the Merry's final words later on more impactful. In my opinion, I love the idea of the Merry arriving because it's been established it has the sentient, spiritual connection with the crew, and also I know it's talked in the past. I think maybe my problem is things felt a little too overkill with the Sea of Adventure comment. But that feeling quickly faded. That's because the crew gets an awesome escape sequence. It's here we get the reveal of what Sanji was up to during the climactic battle. Of course, he was saving everyone's asses. He disappeared during the Straw Hats defending the bridge and came back without much explanation until it's revealed during this escape that the whirlpools around Enies Lobby are back. It turns out Sanji went to close the gates of justice, which are now causing the battleships to go nuts. So dope and so smooth, Sanji continues his trope of being in the right place at the right time. Robin also has a moment of sweet revenge. As they are dodging cannon fire, Robin seemingly murders Spandam. She at least breaks that fucker in half. Good. Then, with Frankie's power, the Going Merry sails off into the sky once again, escaping the world government's pursuit and leaving them utterly defeated. They survived the Buster Call. So that's that, the end of the Enies Lobby arc. Jesus Christ, what an absolute roller coaster this has been. Like I said in my previous video, this is the saga that locked me in. I'm committed to finishing the series no matter how long it runs and how long it takes me. I'm in this for the long haul, and it's all thanks to these story arcs. I think that Water 7 was so good, and for Enies Lobby to have delivered beyond even my expectations showed me what an incredibly well-written story this was. I like action and colorful, weird characters as much as the next guy, but the writing, particularly the character writing, is what has me hooked. I think that Enies Lobby is the best arc in the series so far, with Water 7 as a close second, But the saga isn't over yet. Originally, I thought I'd be able to talk about both the Enies Lobby and post-Enies Lobby arcs in one video, but I think there's just too much to say for post-Enies Lobby that it deserves its own time to shine. So I'm going to be wrapping things up with my post-Enies Lobby video dropping in 2 weeks, but thank you so much for watching this video. What are your first impressions of my first impressions? Please let me know your thoughts on the Enies Lobby arc. What was your favorite fight? Who was your favorite member of CP9? And if you're truly an insane person who's still watching this, then please tell me that you want to live in the comments below. Thank you again for your time. I hope to see you in the next video, but until then, I'll shut up.